Hey Internet, welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction.
This episode of Worldview Everlasting is brought to you by the letter Awesome, the numbers Sweet Action, and Issues Etc. Talk radio for the thinking Christian. issuesetc.org.
And on this week's show, preparation for the day of Transfiguration. That day we remember how Jesus basically Mighty Morphin power morphed into God and man. Not that he wasn't ever that before, but you could see it and it was crazy. His disciples didn't know what to do, and this is happening in the book of Mark so that nobody knows what to do, and we'll try to kind of cover what that means. You might want to stick around. Alright, but you also might be wondering why we're diving so far ahead. We've spent the last month and a half in Mark chapter 1 and barely a hint of Mark chapter 2, even looking at sections of chapter 1 multiple times. And if you're new to Lutheranism and coming out of sort of Bible-only, aka formerly Baptist churches,
Be surprised how many non-Lutherans try to sneak in.
you're used to seeing large portions of text dealt with and going all the way through a book. Well, hopefully, if you really were in a Bible-believing church. And so you're like, wait, what happened to chapters 3 through 9? Well, here's the thing. The appointed lectionary readings in Lutheran churches, as part of Western Christianity's historical tradition of reading the Bible together, going all the way back till the early Middle Ages, revolves not so much around the structure of any particular book, but around the structure of the church here, which revolves around the life of Jesus and the life of the church after Jesus left during the days of Pentecost. So, from Christmas until Easter, you basically follow Jesus' life thematically, with a different piece being added every week. And following his ascension and the day of Pentecost, you do what the Christians who were baptized at Pentecost did. You go back and you study Jesus' teaching, right? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread and prayers. What this means is that much of the book of Mark will be looked at after Pentecost, and we go back and pick up all the pieces that we've missed. Whereas right now, we're going to skip around to fit everything into this structure of Jesus' life, historically speaking. Now, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of the way that this particular series B in the 3-year was set up, because we're actually going to totally dive away from Mark as well. For a fairly good chunk of time, we're going to spend time in John. And it is kind of awkward if you want to do any straight through reading. Nonetheless, it shouldn't stop you from learning about, what Mark is really getting at, as well as, the gospel, which is what you need to hear again and again and again to be reconverted, daily drowned in your baptism and brought forth in faith, ready to face another week in this vale of tears. Alright, so this week we fast forward zoom to Mark chapter 9 verses 2 through 9, which is after what you might call the end of the second section of Mark's gospel. Mark is notoriously difficult to structure, to outline, and many scholars over the years have promoted different versions of this. I'm going to just kind of go with what Dr. James Vels in his commentary from Concordia Publishing House has went with. Which is that you have a very short first section that introduces the book, just basically the first 7 verses, I forget, until it says, "In those days Jesus came." And then that runs all the way up to the beginning of chapter 8, where that phrase, "in those days," is repeated. And what has happened between then? Well, Jesus has basically done all things well, and even in his confrontations with others, they're unable to deal with him. He basically just is rock and rolling all the way. Huge crowds are following him, and he's able to always silence his opponents. But we're about to see a shift in that. That in those days when great crowds were following him, other things started to go wrong. Particularly, even his disciples, his chosen few, don't understand who he is. And this is sort of the overall theme of Mark again. Remember, Mark is the book of faith, not of sight. And so you got to listen to Jesus' words, not assume that what you see is what he's actually here to do. That's why he's always telling everyone to be quiet about what he's done and to listen to what he says. And now, what's he going to say? He's going to start making passion predictions. He's going to start saying, look, I'm here to fulfill the Old Testament scriptures, which means I'm going to go to the cross and die and rise again. Meanwhile, he's also doing miracles out among the Gentiles, out among the nations, not with the Jews who seem to not be receiving him. Instead, even after him doing miracles, they keep demanding more signs for him to prove himself. This leads into a very weird situation where Jesus does sort of half a miracle and then has to complete it. A man who is blind is given sight, sort of, but then it doesn't really work, and then Jesus does it again. Weird stuff there. We're not going to have time for it today. Right after that is where Mark puts his confession of St. Peter, where Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do you say that that I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ. And then Jesus says, yep, you're right, I am. So here it is, the passion prediction. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected and be killed and after 3 days rise. And at this point, Peter pipes up and says, ain't gonna be that way, Lord. Because, when God speaks, it's usually a good idea to tell him he's wrong. Actually, it's what we do naturally. Jesus rebukes him, of course, and this is kind of the point. We don't natively think what's right, we think what's wrong. We are on Satan's side, not God's side, and Jesus came to put us back on God's side. He makes this clear in no uncertain terms by saying to the crowds that were around them at this same time, if anyone is ashamed of my words, I will be ashamed of him. That is, what Jesus has said, that's truth. And what is not said by Jesus, well, we can't know. And what is said against what Jesus said, well, that's not truth. It's wrong. It's on the side of the devil and the demons. It's 6 days after this conversation that our text comes into play. This transfiguration moment, which is right in the middle between two of these passion predictions, with another sort of passion prediction fudged up inside of it as well, which is after our appointed text, but close enough that we will talk about it. So 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter and James and John and takes them alone up a mountain. Which mountain? We don't really know. Is it just a hill? It doesn't really matter. The point is, they're going up a mountain. And if you know anything about your Old Testament, you know that pretty important things happen on mountains. Like God tends to show up. Mount Sinai being kind of the primary picture where both Moses and Elijah, in fact, did meet God, well, face to face, not so much with a face, but with a cloud and with
rainbows on fire.
And that's important to keep in mind because that's exactly what's going to happen again. So while they're up on this mountain alone with Jesus, Jesus metamorphos. Our word metamorphosis comes from the Greek word here, metamorphothe, which is usually translated as transfigured, as if the average human being knew what that meant. It means changed, totally and radically turned from one thing to another. And Mark draws the attention to, so radical was this change that even Jesus' clothes now began to shine with such a brilliant, hot white light that it was like hard to look at. Nobody in the world could ever possibly dye or make clothing that would look like this. This was a manifestation of heavenly glory through the physical human person of Jesus, like kapow. And with this happening, this glory of God shining off of Jesus, not unlike the glory that shined off Moses' head, but like more so, because it's not just God bouncing off of Moses, this is actually God who is Jesus. But Moses and Elijah do show up. They're suddenly standing there as well, talking to Jesus. Now, I always kind of like to play with these ideas, and I have in my own head, I like to think that maybe this is actually the conversation that was taking place on Mount Sinai. Like Jesus is actually right there telling Moses, here's the 10 Commandments, and go down because they're worshiping a cow. And then he's saying to Elijah, there are 7,000 I've reserved for myself, right? Like, so time and space kind of bend in on each other, and it's all happening in God's eye at the same time. But that's, that's me being a weirdo kind of Doctor Who fan, right?
Wibbly Wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You can't say that for sure. What you can say for sure is that Moses and Elijah are there with Jesus talking. And then Peter basically can't help himself. He has to say something. The Greek here makes it pretty clear that he's uncomfortable. It doesn't just say that he said, it's that he answered Jesus here, right? Well, answer what and why? And you look a little further down, you find out that he and James and John are scared. They're overcome by this. And so since he just has to say something, he says, okay, Lord, look, this is good. It's good that we're here with your crazy glory that might just break out and kill us because we're sinners. So here's what we should do. We'll set up 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, translators have always struggled with what do you do with this word tents? It is literally the word tent, although it does have in the Bible broader ramifications than your camping trip to Yosemite. This is the word that's used in the Old Covenant Feast of Booths, Feast of Tents, Feast of Tabernacles. And it is a word that did get used to refer to the tabernacle in the Old Testament where the Ark of the Covenant sat, where God actually was with his people. It is not the word that is translated tabernacle, but the word that you'll find translated as the tent of meeting, tent of witness, or tent of the testimony, which in New Testament passages such as Hebrews 9:11, Revelation 15:5, and Luke 16:9 also gets used to refer to the place where God actually dwells in heaven and the place where we will dwell with God in the life of the world to come, which is not exactly the same thing, but the point is it's a word that can mean not just human-made tent, but this celestial tent, this true holy place, this holy place that we even find here on earth in the tabernacle as it comes kind of down to us. And so if you really want to think about what Peter's actually saying, he's not just saying, hey, let's just live here and hang out. He's saying this is a holy thing that's taking place. Jesus, you're the Christ, and you're here to reestablish the kingdom which was lost. So what we're going to do right now now is like replace the tent of meeting. Let's put up an actual shrine, a cathedral. It might be a small one, but a cathedral idea, a shrine, a holy place for you and for Moses and Elijah, because clearly they're going to be part of this eschatological reign you're about to bring to pass right now. That's what you're doing, right, Jesus? And you can understand how while Peter is saying this, he's getting more and more terrified because there is a giant dark cloud beginning to overwhelm them. Is it fog? How is Jesus' brightness interacting with the cloud? I don't know. The point is that it's getting harder and harder to see anything that's going on besides this crazy glory. So as good Jews, their memory of the Old Testament fire and smoke and danger and glory from Mount Sinai is coming to play. They're shaking a little. And so Peter's talking, but he doesn't know what he's saying. And again, this is Mark's point. Nobody understands who Jesus is. Even Peter, who's confessed him to be the Christ, doesn't get what he's here to do on a mountain, which is not set up a new tabernacle, but have the tabernacle of his body torn down so he can rebuild it. So then suddenly in the midst of this glorious bright darkness, they also hear a voice. And this voice has got to be the voice of the Father in heaven, who says some very important, very specific words. He says, this one, this singular one, is my son, ha agapetos, the beloved, the singular beloved, the only one who I desire. This one guy, this Jesus, is the only human being I care about. But doesn't God love everybody? Yes, in Jesus. Yeah, and that's the point. He is the one. Look to him. He's the singularity. And how do you look to him? Not with your eyes, but with what the voice says. Listen to him. Hear his words. If anyone's ashamed of his words, they're not a Christian. If they believe his words, even if they don't like them, they are a Christian. Verse 8, which follows this, is really kind of wooden and hard to translate. The ESV does an alright job. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with it. And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. It's awkward, right? It's wooden. But the point is, they're in the midst of this Mount Sinai experience where Peter's babbling until he's broken off by God from heaven saying, shut your mouth and listen to that guy who's glowing in front of you. And then bam, everything's gone. There's nothing, no cloud, no glory, no brightness, no Moses, no Elijah, just Jesus. It's just poof, and he's just there again, the guy you walked up the mountain with. And you're like, okay. And Jesus starts to talk and he takes you down the mountainside. And as you're going down the mountainside, he says, now here's the thing, guys. What you just saw is pretty spiffy, but you are not allowed to tell anybody about it until after the Son of Man, which you guys know that, when I say that, I'm talking about myself, till after the Son of Man is risen from the dead, right? So passion prediction, right? Again, well, they do. They decide to keep this matter to themselves, but they don't understand. What does he mean, rise from the dead? I don't understand. He did say that thing about the cross and everything, but it doesn't make any sense to us. So we don't know what he means. Basically, because their hearts are hardened, and this is Mark's point. Human hearts are hardened until Jesus calls us. That's just the way it is. And he doesn't really call except for through that cross and resurrection. They even start to ask Jesus about this. They say, well, why do the scribes say that Elijah has to come before all of this? And Jesus basically says Elijah has to come to restore all things, that is to call people back to repentance. That's what John the Baptist did. But he again says, you're thinking about the wrong thing. Why are you looking for Elijah? Rather, you should be asking this question. Why does the Old Testament say that the Son of Man has to suffer? Once you get that it's your sin that needs to be atoned for, the death and resurrection thing suddenly makes sense. Nonetheless, he says Elijah has come and they've already done to him what was written of him. So know this, what was written of the Son of Man will come to pass. He's going to say that again in a few more verses after he has a little bit of a run-in with the demon and a bunch of people who really don't believe and don't understand, and he gets frustrated, but he casts out the demon anyway. All of this is Mark showing us this dark hero of Jesus, this kind of backwards, odd, crazy, spirit-possessed man who has come to do the thing that we need because he actually does love us and want to save us from ourselves, but we are so blind and backwards we don't even understand it when he's saying it to our faces. Instead, we too have to die and rise, and that happens by the killing he brings, cursing us with his law, driving home the point we deserve nothing, and then saying, hey, that's just it. You deserve nothing. But now, once you've deserved nothing, you can understand that I've given you everything right here. Anyhow, like I said, it's a little awkward to jump out of the front of Mark into the middle of this, but hopefully you got the picture. It's always, always, always about the cross of Jesus. And if you're going to take anything from the text today, take the point that Jesus makes. He gets frustrated when you don't understand it's about the cross of Jesus. He wants you to believe this so badly because it's there in that cross you hear his words of, you will live forever. Truly today, you'll be with me in paradise. All right, if you like what we do here at Worldview Everlasting, remember, you can always support the show. $5 a month goes a long way toward making what we do here happen. And check out those devotionals from Around the Word with Brian Wolfmueller and his team of acrobatic traveling devotional gypsies that put it together for him every week. Really, seriously, you got to ask him about it. And if you like the show, you can like this particular show, subscribe to the channel, and push this stuff forward through your various media resources. Tune in next week when we jump back to Mark chapter 1, verses 9 through 15, which, seems familiar, yeah? But we'll figure out something to do to make it new and exciting again. All right, till next time, rock on.
got away from me, yeah.